Well, good morning again. If you have a Bible with you this morning, I would invite you to open it with me to the book of Exodus. We are going back to the book of Exodus where we had been for quite some time. And this will be at least for this sermon series anyway, my last, probably not for my lifetime, but my last sermon out of Exodus in this sermon series. Matt is going to preach out of Exodus next week, and then Tony's going to come in about a month and preach the last one for this sermon series, and then we'll be done with this sermon series that we've entitled Out of Egypt. And we've been off of that for a few weeks as we've been in the Gospel of John talking about the resurrection and the revelation of that from Jesus to his people. And so if you have not been here for any of the Exodus sermon series, or if maybe you just need refreshed, just really quickly, we've been looking at God's people who have been in slavery in Egypt for a few hundred years, and they have multiplied greatly, and now God is delivering them out of that slavery. God has, by his goodness, he has brought them out. He has brought plagues and to judge Egypt and to cause the Pharaoh and the people to desire that they would leave and to be sent out. And over, God has proven his power and his strength and his love and his care for his people. And Pharaoh finally, after many plagues, Pharaoh has finally said, not only can you leave, but you need to leave. We don't want you here anymore. They have exited. Then Pharaoh changes his mind and says, actually, I'd rather you stay. God makes a way for them to be able to exit and also to finally judge Egypt and his army. They have crossed over out of Egypt, and they are now on their way to a land that God has promised them that they would have. And so our text picks up just a few days after they leave, and then part of our text this morning will be about a month after they leave. But one of the things that we see is going to happen, and we're going to be in a lot of text today, and so I don't have a huge amount of time for introduction, but one of the things that we're going to see this morning is that God has faithfully, we sang about that just a moment ago, God has faithfully kept his promise and brought them out of Egypt. He is now going to faithfully take them and lead them into the promised land. And yet, there's an issue, and when the issues come up, we'll see issues today of water and of food primarily. And when those come up, rather than proclaiming, great is thy faithfulness, the Israelites complain and say, God, did you bring us out here to die? And just days after they see miraculous things that God has done, they forget and they say, God, what are you doing? And so God is doing a couple of things in here. He is proving who he is and showing his faithfulness, but he's doing something else. And by way of introduction, just if you'll humor me for a moment, I wanted to read you a quote from Spurgeon. He says this: "It seems to us a difficult thing to supply food for hundreds of thousands or the millions who were in the wilderness. But difficult as that was, the supply of food was not so difficult as the education. To train that mob of slaves into a nation under discipline, to lift up those who had been in bondage and to make them fit to enjoy national privileges, this was the Herculean task Moses had to perform." The truth of the matter is that none of us trust God on our own. We all, like children, have to learn to trust God over a period of time. God has to teach us that we can sing, great is thy faithfulness. God has to teach us that he is a mighty fortress that we can rest in and trust in on a daily basis. And even after sometimes that's happened, we still forget. And sometimes we still become afraid. And sometimes we might even grumble. Sometimes we might even complain. Sometimes we might even cast blame upon God for what's going on. And so in the midst of these situations, what we see is God proving himself to be faithful and good, but we also see God teaching a people to have faith in him, teaching them to trust, patiently providing for them and allowing them to see that He truly is their Jehovah Jireh, their provider in all things. And so today our text will be Exodus chapter 15. We'll begin reading in verse 22. Again, they have just exited out. The Egyptian army has been defeated, and they are beginning to walk towards the promised land by the leading of God through His pillar of fire and His cloud. Our text will go all the way through the end of chapter 16. So, big text today. So follow with me if you will. God's perfect and inspired word says this. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. When he cast it into the waters were made sweet. There he made a statute and an ordinance for them, and there he tested them and said, "If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in His sight, give ear to His commandments and keep His statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, and there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, so they camped by the waters. And they journeyed from Elim, and the congregation of the children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily." Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, "At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for He hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "This shall be a scene when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and in the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against Him. And what are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses spoke to Aaron, "Say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, come near before the Lord, for He has heard your complaints." Now it came to pass, as Aaron spoke, the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God." So it was that quail came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was small round substance, as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Then Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need, 1 omer for each person. According to the number of persons, let every man take for those who are in his tent." Then the children of Israel did so and gathered some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, "Let no one leave any of it till morning." Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, every man according to his need. So when the sun became hot, it melted. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. And the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil, and lay up for yourselves all that remains, to be kept until morning." So they laid it up till morning, as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, "Eat that today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Now it happened that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of the place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. Then the house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like a white coriander seed, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. And Moses said, "This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept by your generations, that they may see the bread with which I fed you in the wilderness, and I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a pot and put an omer of manna in it, and lay it up before the Lord to be kept by your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer was 1/10 of an ephah. Thankful they put that last one in there to clear that up. Huge text. I'll explain to you in a few weeks why we're doing so much text at one time. But this morning there are a few things in this text that I want to make sure that we see. Obviously there's more in this text than what we can do in one Sunday morning, but there are a few really important things that we need to see and that we need to learn and that we need to learn to trust in for ourselves and our walk with our Savior. And so go back with me up to chapter 15, verses 22 through 27, as we see the bitter water made sweet. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea. Then they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. Now when they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah, which that word means bitter. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And when he cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made a statute, an ordinance for them, and there he tested them and said, "If you diligently seek or heed the voice of the Lord your God, and do what is right in his sight, give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you which I have brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees, so they encamped there by the waters. The first thing that I want us to remember, and I want us to make sure that we understand as we go through all of these things, is that when they come to these waters that are bitter, when they come to the place and they find no water, they've been walking for 3 days, and probably by this time the water that they have taken with them has dried up. They're now out of water, and they're walking around, and for 3 days they don't find any water. They begin to get thirsty. They begin to get nervous. What are we going to do? Then they finally see some water, and they think, finally, here it is. This is our chance. This is our hope. And they get there, and the water is bitter, right? It's water that they cannot drink. It will make them probably sick. They cannot stomach to drink the water. But what I want you to understand is when they are doing this, they are not wandering aimlessly. They are not just wandering around lost, hoping to find some water. Remember, God is leading them in this. God is directing them. They are following that cloud. They are following that pillar. They are following the direction of God in their lives. They are not being disobedient. Rather, they're being obedient. These people are doing exactly what God has called them to do, and yet they find themselves in a difficult situation, and yet they encounter this lack of water, this fear for their lives. They encounter this water that is bitter and cannot be drank. And I point that out because it's important for us to remember that in our lives, when we come up upon things that would cause us to fear, when we come up upon things that maybe would be bitter situations in our lives, when we come up on difficulties and struggles in our lives, we need to remember that we're there because God has put us there. We didn't just fall into that situation. We're there for a reason. Now, we may not understand fully what that reason is in that moment. It may take years. It may be in eternity, to be honest with you, before we really understand why we were put in that position. But the truth is that even when we're following after Jesus closely, even when we're seeking His face, even when we are seeking to be completely obedient to His word, we can find ourselves in seasons of life that are dry and bitter and difficult. We can find ourselves in seasons of loss, in seasons of struggle, in seasons of trial, in seasons that would cause us to question. So the question would be, why then would God allow them to be there? It seems to make more sense that God, when He says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt and I'm going to take you to the promised land, that He would just take them there, right? And it would be easy, and there would just be a water fountain every so often, right? Or a Pete's, just like Southeast Kansas. Everywhere you go, there's a Pete's, right? And you can go and get a drink. You would think that He would do it that way. Well, the reason is because, again, I believe He desires to teach them. He desires to teach them that nature is not their provider, that they are not their provider, that circumstance or happenstance is not their provider, but rather that God Himself is the one who will keep them. That God Himself is the one who will give them life and give them strength and sustain them upon their daily walk. And so they are desperate at this point for food, or not for food, but for water, and they are afraid. What are we going to do? And so God does what God does, and He provides. If you look in verses 25 through 27, it says this. And look back up in 24. And the people complained against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And when he cast it in the waters were made sweet. God provides. In verse 27, it says, and they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water, 70 palm trees, and so they encamped by the waters. What we see very clearly is that these people do need to learn to trust. Because rather than going to Moses and saying, our God who has made a way out of Egypt, our God who has conquered the most mighty nation in all of the world through His plagues, our God who has parted the Red Sea and brought it back again, our God who has made a way when there hasn't been a way over and over again, our God will surely provide water. Rather than doing that, they go and they complain to Moses. And I'm sure Moses is thinking, well, what do you want me to do? You know, what do you want me to do? And so we see very clearly that by their response, they have not learned to trust just yet. In fact, what we'll see for the next 40 years, they haven't really learned to trust. And again, it's easy for us to look at them and say, what's your problem? But many times what we should do is look in the mirror and say, what's your problem? Why haven't you yet learned to trust? But what we see is that Moses, in faith, goes to God. So the people come to complain to Moses, and Moses knows very clearly, well, I don't know what to do. I don't have any ability. I don't have any strength. I don't know where the water is. I don't know how to make this water taste good or be safe. So he goes and he prays and he cries out in verse 23. So he cried out to the Lord. Lord, I trust you and I don't know what to do. And if you don't act, we're all going to die. And so he cries out with this desperation and this faith. And God does something very peculiar. He says, go get a tree and throw it in the water. It doesn't seem like it would help. In fact, it seems like it might make it worse, right? Great, now the water tastes like bitterness and a tree. You know, this doesn't seem to be making it better. But he goes and he takes this tree. Now, we don't have any belief that this was any sort of natural cause, that God is simply by a miraculous thing causing this water to be sweet for a time. And we know that even after that, it wasn't sweet, that this was provision for them in this moment. But that Moses takes the tree and he throws it in there. In verse 25, it says again, so he showed him a tree, and when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. And so by the miraculous hand of God, he provides water to sustain them for the day until they can get to Elim, where there are many wells. By the goodness of God, he provides. here's what's good news to us in this text. Each one of these little situations has something that's good news to us. We have a tree, don't we? We have a tree that our Savior hung on. It says in Acts chapter 5, verses 30 and 32, the God of our fathers raised up Jesus, whom you murdered by hanging on a tree. Him God has exalted to his right hand and to be a prince and Savior, to be given repentance to Israel and forgiveness of sins. And we are his witnesses of these things, and so also is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to those who obey him. Jesus, who was murdered by hanging on a tree. You see, here's the good news. Here's what gives us hope in our times of bitterness. Here's what gives us hope in our times of loss, in our times of difficulty, in the times of struggle. The cross is what gives us hope. Listen, when the Bible tells us that we grieve differently than the world grieves. When a Christian dies, we grieve differently because the cross has given us hope. Whenever there's situations and there's struggles, when we face the uncertainty of life, when we face, these people are in a life and death situation, are they not? If they don't get water, they've been 3 days in the wilderness walking. If they don't get water soon, they die. They're not being, dramatic. Later they get a little dramatic. But right now, they're not being dramatic, right? Literally, if they don't have water, they're going to die. But listen, when we face that life and death situation, when we're called to go in life and death situation, when we face the end of this life, we need not fear. Why? Because of the cross. Because the cross says, I've made peace with that. Maybe these situations aren't that big. Maybe they're smaller things. Maybe they're relational things. Maybe they're interpersonal things. The cross changes that too. Because whenever I have conflict and whenever I have struggle with a person, and I come to them in my own flesh and they come to me in my own flesh, then all I have is pride and self-will and anger and selfishness. But whenever I come and we meet at the cross, now something's different. When we meet at the cross, now I see myself not as someone who needs to be served, but as someone who needs to serve someone else. I come not with pride, but I come with guilt. Now I come with forgiveness. Now I come as a person who's been shown the glorious grace of God and mercy in my life. And I look at the cross and I say, if Jesus has given me that grace, why can't I give it to them? If Jesus has given me that mercy, why can't I show it to someone else? If God has made reconciliation between me and him through the person of Jesus, why can't I make reconciliation with this person? And so there are times in our lives where even relationally there may be bitterness or there may be struggles, but the cross changes that because we have a tree. And Jesus laid his life down on it. And so there's good news in that. And then he gives them a place in verse 27 to camp. He gives them shade, 70 palm trees. I don't know who counted them, but that's how many was there. And they camped out in the shade and they had a cool drink of water because he's a good shepherd, because he cares for his people. So the first thing that we see is that God has provided reconciliation. He's provided hope in our struggles because of the cross. Because of the cross. The second thing is this. They first are complaining about water. That's the first thing that they need, right? But now they start to get hungry. They start to wonder, well, what are we going to eat? And how is this going to work? I don't know if any of you have teenagers in your home. This is, you probably get this like 3 times a day. Right? I'm going to perish if I don't eat in the next 5 minutes, right? And so now we see them in need of meat and bread. And so verses 1 through 21, but let's just look in verses 1 through 3. It says, and they journeyed from Elim, and all the congregation of children of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the 2nd month, they departed from the land of Egypt. Then the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said to them, oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat, and when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. When we sat by pots of meat. Those were the days when we sat by the meat pots, weren't they? Man, I tell you, that's a good day in my house. You put a pot of meat, we'll gather around. It's a good day, right? So what we see is they complained again. Now we're about a month down the road. And now they don't know what they're going to eat. And I know that sometimes we would think, well, wait a minute, how do they not have anything to eat? They brought their herds with them and stuff like that. You need to remember they're in the middle of the wilderness, in the middle of the desert. Anything that they would slaughter to eat, they would have to slaughter, eat, cook, and all in one day. They could not take any of it with them. It would be completely wasteful. It would be very difficult to do those sorts of things. And so they've run out of the bread that they have made beforehand. They run out of stuff to make the bread. They don't know what they're going to do, and they complain again. I want you to notice that it says in verse 2, the whole congregation of the children of Israel complained. Earlier, it just says in verse 24, and the people complained against Moses. But now it says the whole congregation complained. Some of your Bibles may say murmuring. Complaining is contagious. Church, complaining is contagious. Murmuring is contagious. And now everybody is complaining. No one is trusting. Everyone is mad at Moses. Everyone is mad at God. Have you brought us out here? Listen, their life was not easy in Egypt. They weren't sitting around in lawn chairs eating meat out of the pot and bread like it was a vacation, okay? They are exaggerating. Their life was difficult. But what do? They say, well, we should have just died there. It would have been better for us to die by a plague. This is what they're saying. It would have been better for us to die by a plague than to this. Now they're being a little dramatic. But what we see is even yet again, after God, you would think 1 month removed from throwing a tree in a pond and making the water drinkable, they would say, we're hungry, we trust you, what will you do? But no. They complain yet again, and God answers them. In verses 4 through 11, it says this, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them whether they will walk in my law or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. Then Moses and Aaron said to all the children of Israel, At evening you shall know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your complaints against the Lord. But what are we that you complain against us? And Moses said, This shall be seen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and the morning bread to the full. For the Lord hears your complaints which you make against him. And who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses spoke to Aaron, Say to all the congregation of the children of Israel, Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. Now, if it came to pass, as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. So this time, without Moses even asking, God just responds. Why? Because God knows where they're at, and God knows their need perfectly. He knew that he was going to provide this meat and this bread. This was his plan to do so all along. He knew what the hearts of the people would be. He knew he needed to mold and shape the people into a people that would trust, and he knew that they weren't there yet. And so God just begins to provide. In verse 4 and 5 and verse 11, he tells Moses. Moses is the one who's fielding all of the complaints. He's the one who keeps saying, I hear you, I'm hungry too. I don't know what to do. I don't know where we're supposed to get bread. I'm not sure what to do. He's the one who hears it. So he comes and he speaks to the leader first, and he tells Moses. And then Moses and Aaron in verse 6 and 8, they tell the people, God is going to do this. God is going to provide. You need not worry. You can trust in him. They are his herald. They are his mouthpiece to the people. You can wait on him. You can trust in him. And even in verse 9 and 10, God reveals to them that it's him who provides. He reveals his glory in the clouds. No, this is not coming from Moses and Aaron. This is coming from me. I am not going to leave you out here to die. This is the good thing. You should follow me. And so God answers them, giving them hope, giving them a promise that he will do He will provide for them along their journey. So then in verses 12 through 21, he does just that. He provides for them again. In verse 12, it says at twilight, verse 13. So it was that quail came up at evening and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay all around the camp. And when the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a small round substance as fine as frost on the ground. So when the children of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord has commanded. Let every man gather it according to each one's need. For 1 omer for each person, according to the number of persons. Let every man take those who are in his tent." Then the children of Israel did so and gathered, some more, some less. So when they measured it by omers, he who gathered much had nothing left over, and he who gathered little had no lack. Every man had gathered according to each one's need. And Moses said, "Let no one leave it until morning." Notwithstanding, they did not heed Moses, but some of them left part of it until morning. And it bred worms and stank, and Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, and every man according to his need. When the sun became hot, it melted. And so God provides again. First, he provides water. Now he provides meat and bread. He does this, though, in 2 separate ways, proving again his authority and his godship. He provides the quail from his creation. We don't believe that anything about this was miraculous except for the fact that they all came to one place at one time, right? It was not uncommon for there to be a quail-type bird in that area at that time, and they would have been in the fields and they would have been everywhere. They were plentiful. And so all God did was just herd them. Right? He just took his natural things that he had already created and he provided for the people, much the way that he does for us. Many times when God does things for us, when he answers our prayers, when he provides for us, he doesn't do it in some crazy miraculous way. He does it through ways that he's already created, through the provision of people, through doctors, through other people, through the church, through natural means that he has already given us because he's set up a good world and a good order. He has put those things in place. And so God, through his creation, provides the quail for them on that night to give them some sustenance to get through the night until the next morning. But the second thing is not like that. The second thing is literally a creation. In verses 14 through 16, what we see is that God creates something that they have never seen before. That word manna means we don't know what this is. They've never seen it before. This is not a natural phenomenon. Nobody had seen it before them, and nobody has seen it after. It only happened for that 40-year or so period that the people were in the wilderness. And so God, by his miraculous hand, by his powerful right hand, creates this manna, creates this bread in order for them to be able to eat. And he creates it good. If you look over in verse 31, in verse 31 it says this, "And the house of Israel called its name manna, and it was like white coriander seed, and its taste was like wafers made with honey." Everybody liked it. Everybody thought it was good. I didn't know that was even possible. We have a house of 5, and that's not possible, right? Where everybody likes it, and everybody says that it's good, right? But yet everybody did. And God created a way for them to be fulfilled. He created a way for them to sustain life. Here's what John chapter 6, verse 51 says about that same bread. Jesus says, "I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If anyone eats this bread, he will live forever, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world." Sometimes when we look in the Old Testament, we see, yes, we believe this is a foreshadowing or a picture of something in the New Testament. Sometimes the New Testament tells us this is absolutely a foreshadowing of that. And Jesus says, you remember that bread that came from heaven? That was a picture of me. I am your source of life. Not just life for 40 years, I'm your source of life for eternity. If you, through my broken body, come to me, you will have life. He doesn't just give them bread, but he also gives them meat. In Hebrews chapter 5, verses 12 through 14, it says this, "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God. And you have come to need milk and not solid food or meat. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. but solid food or meat belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason have use of their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And so not just does he give us life, but he gives us meat. He gives us his word to be able to dive in and to digest and to chew on, to give us strength day to day in our lives. And so God provides for them the bread and the meat that they need by his miraculous ways, and he sent Jesus to be that bread of life. I pray that we would be people who trust in him for that life every day. Trust in him not just for our daily bread that we would eat, but for our eternal life as we live out our lives. And so the first thing that they needed is water. And the second thing that they needed is food. But the third thing that they needed, I don't even know if they knew that they needed it. I don't know if they even knew that it was something that they needed. And I think for some of them it definitely wasn't, because they tried not to do it. The third thing that they needed was a Sabbath. And some of you know a couple of years ago that I took a sabbatical. For the first time in my pastoral ministry, I took a sabbatical, and Katie's going to take one next year, whether she likes it or not. And to be honest with you, I didn't think I needed a sabbatical. I didn't think I needed to be off for a month. I didn't think that I needed to be separated from anything for a month. I thought that I was just fine and everything was good, and I was being a wimp if I rested. About 4 days in, I was like, nope, I needed this, right? And about 4 weeks in, I thought, this could have been 3 weeks longer, right? And sometimes what we don't realize is that we need rest. But here's what I want to say before we get into this. What the world needs, what people in the world need, is rest. Because without Jesus, there is none. And there's an unrest. When you see people in the world without Jesus, what you will find is people in unrest. You will find people who are searching for love and validation and hope and security and all of those things that Jesus gives in all the wrong places. And there's a lack of rest in their soul. We used to notice, I didn't recognize this until somebody pointed it out to me, but when we would go to Beautiful Feet, we would notice that the people who were homeless that we were going to serve, they would rarely sit. They would just walk. They would just mill around. They don't have jobs. Most of us, if we didn't have to go to work, what would we do? We'd sit and rest for a day, right? Those people never went to work. What did they do? They walked all day long. Back and forth, up and down, round in circles, here to there to here, everywhere to go, accomplishing absolutely nothing. Why? Because they had no rest. Because they had no peace. And what God says to these people is, you may not know it, but you are going to need rest. And so he provides a Sabbath for them. In verses 22 through 31, it says this. And so it was on the 6th day that they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord has said, tomorrow is a Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake today, and boil what you will boil. Lay up for yourselves all that remains, and be kept till morning. So they laid it till morning, and as Moses commanded, and it did not stink, nor were there any worms in it. Then Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath rest. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. So if you remember before, when they first started this process, some of them went and they gathered more than they needed, and they cooked more than they needed, and they tried to keep it for the next day. And when they woke up the next day, this is like Tuesday and Wednesday, I don't know, right? It's just a general everyday. They wake up and their bread is full of worms, which would be a bummer, right? And it stinks, and they got stinky, wormy bread in their tent, right? And so they know we can't do this. And now Moses says, actually, now you can. Just today, you can go and you can gather twice as much, and you can bake twice as much, and you can keep it, and it'll be fine, and God will make sure that it doesn't do this. And he does that, right? And so he tells them that he's going to provide rest for them. He provides an opportunity for rest. He says, this is what you can do. I'm going to make sure that you have enough food. I'm going to make sure that there's enough food for you to gather. And then I'm going to make sure that that food does not does not go bad. And so any other time they would not have been that much food and it would not have kept, but God provides an opportunity for them to find rest. Again, this is important for them. They're wandering, they're walking, they're in the desert. This is a difficult way of living. And so he provides an opportunity for them to have rest. And we too are in need of rest. That's why Jesus says in Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." In Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, he says this, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." This command of a Sabbath, Jesus fulfills perfectly. And he says, now you come to me for that rest. Not just rest for your bodies, but as he says in verse 29 of Matthew 11, rest for your souls. And so Jesus has provided rest. He is offering to you today rest for your soul. Your soul need not fear the death of your body. Your soul need not fear what may happen tomorrow or the difficult circumstance that you're in, because Jesus has provided rest. Some of them said, "This sounds like a great plan. We'll do that." Others said, "I don't think so." I think the kids would call them today tryhards. I think that's what the kids would say today. These guys are tryhards. Some of those people woke up. They woke up on Saturday morning and they went out to gather more food, because if some was good yesterday, more must be better today. But there wasn't anything there. And so what we see is not only was a rest provided, but a rest was required. In verse 27, it says, "Now it happened that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found none. And the Lord said to Moses, 'How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you on the sixth day bread for 2 days. Let every man remain in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day.' So the people rested on the seventh day." This rest wasn't just provided, it was required. And here's why I bring that up. I think many times today, even for Christians, we try to find rest in other places than in Jesus. We try to find rest in our jobs, in our relationships, in our retirement accounts, in all of the different things that we do. But here is the reality. The only rest that will give you real rest is Jesus. Jesus is required for your rest. Without him, you have none. Without Jesus, there is no rest in your life. He is required. We cannot rest in our own ability. They could not rest in a little bit extra manna. So we must rest only in him. And then the last thing that happens is this. He tells them, "I want you to learn to trust me in the giving of the water. I want you to learn to trust me in the giving of the quail and of the food or the manna." But he also says, "I want you to learn and I want you to remember," because he knows how quick we are to forget. In verse 32 through 36, it says this, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded. Fill an omer with it to be kept for your generations, that they may see the bread which I fed you in the wilderness, and when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a pot and put an omer of manna in it, and lay it up before the Lord, and be kept for your generations. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron laid it up before the testimony to be kept. And the children of Israel ate manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer was a tenth of an ephah." So God says, this is a lesson that I want you to not learn just for today, but that I want you to learn for generations to come. That you can trust me in every situation that I bring you to. That I have led you here, and if I have led you here, I am sufficient for you. He wants them to not just remember the manna, but to remember the lessons that come from the manna, that he is the provider, that he is sufficient. Even lessons like you don't need to be greedy and you probably need to share. very simple lessons, but they were struggling with those things. He wanted them to remember that he was trustworthy alone and they could trust him with their lives. Church, I pray that we are a church who remembers that in our everyday lives, we can trust him with our lives. In our everyday needs, we can trust him for our needs. That's why he says to pray, give us this day our daily bread, that each day, moment by moment, minute by minute, he is trustworthy, that we can come to him and he will provide those things with which we need and provide us the ability to get through the things that he brings us to and brings us through. These things did not just last, this food did not just last for a few days or for even 40 years. This ended up being put in the Ark of the Covenant. This was something that they were to remember literally for generation after generation after generation. And why? It's very simple, because we forget. Why do I grumble against God when life doesn't go the way I want it? Because I forget. Why do I get frustrated and angry about situations that don't work out exactly the way that I plan them to work out in my head? Because I forget. Why do I cause other people to complain? Because I started the complaining in the first place? Because I forget. And so constantly, God is doing these two things in the life of the Israelites and the life of ours. He's consistently doing things to help us. And he's consistently providing, but he's also consistently saying, remember. Remember. I pray that there are times of difficulty in your life that you can look back on and say, you know what? I didn't know how I was going to get through that, but God was faithful. God provided a way, and I didn't know what I was going to do. I pray that you would use those things to go back on, that you would even use this story to go back on, and whatever difficulty you may be facing, whatever bitterness may be happening in your life, that you would take it to the cross and allow him to work it out for his glory. Let's pray as the worship team comes. Heavenly Father, this morning we are thankful that Jesus is the bread of life. We're thankful for the living water that comes through him. Father, this morning we recognize that our path may not be straight, and it may not be easy, and it may be filled with twists, turns, and difficulties and afflictions, and yet there's a tree that Jesus hung on that gives us hope, that gives us peace, that gives us reconciliation. So God, I pray this morning that we would look to you in our times of struggle, not in anger and in frustration, but that we would look to you in faith, that we would be able to declare, great is thy faithfulness every day of our lives. Father, help us to trust you not in just the big things of our lives like our salvation, but in the daily walk things of our lives as well. Lord, we love you today. We thank you for your love for us. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.